I never expected my morning to begin with the sound of metal groaning as it slowly surrendered to the ground beneath it. I was standing on my porch with a mug of coffee, still half asleep, when HOA Karen's SUV lurched forward and then dropped as if the earth had opened its mouth. The front end dipped first, subtle enough that she didn't even notice, just a soft bow like the lawn was being polite. Then the weight shifted, the tires spun, and the vehicle sank deeper, mud swallowing rubber with a wet, deliberate patience. There was no crash, no explosion, just a quiet, humiliating descent that felt far worse than noise. I didn't rush, I didn't shout, I didn't even change my expression, because I already knew how this was going to end. The grass held for just a second longer, long enough to give her hope, before collapsing completely under the lie it had been pretending to be. She hit the gas, instinctively, and the sound that came out of the engine was pure panic. That was when she stepped out, heels first, and the lawn took those too, dragging her down inch by inch. She screamed at the ground like it had betrayed her personally, waving her arms, demanding an explanation from dirt. Before we move forward, drop a comment. Where are you watching from? From where I stood, it looked less like an accident and more like a judgment being carried out with surgical calm. This wasn't a freak storm or a random soft spot, and it definitely wasn't bad luck. This was the inevitable result of someone who had spent months treating my property like it didn't exist. HOA Karen had been blocking my lawn every single day, rolling her oversized SUV onto it like the boundary line was optional and respect was negotiable. She never asked, never hesitated, never acknowledged that the grass beneath her tires belonged to someone else. Each morning she parked there with the confidence of someone who had never faced consequences, and each time she did it, she made a decision she didn't realize was being recorded by the earth itself. As her vehicle continued to sink, the neighborhood began to wake up. Curtains twitched, doors opened, and faces appeared, drawn by the sound of an engine struggling against physics. No one rushed to help her, not because they were cruel, but because they understood something she didn't yet. They understood that this wasn't sudden, and it wasn't unfair. This was the culmination of a pattern she had forced into existence. She tried to reverse, tires spinning uselessly, spraying mud across the lawn she had never respected. The deeper she went, the louder she became, her voice cracking as she shouted threats at no one in particular. I took a slow sip of my coffee and stayed where I was. I didn't need to explain anything yet. The scene was doing that work for me. Her SUV, once spotless and imposing, now looked small, trapped, and ridiculous, tilted at an angle that made it impossible to ignore how wrong it all was. Mud crept up the sides of the tires like hands, claiming ground she had assumed was hers. She looked around for someone to blame, locking eyes with me for the first time that morning. In that moment, I saw confusion flicker across her face, followed by anger, then fear. She opened her mouth like she was about to accuse me of something, but nothing came out. The lawn was quiet again, except for the engine whining under stress. That silence mattered more than any argument could have. It told the story without embellishment. It said this didn't happen overnight, and it didn't happen by mistake. It said someone had pushed and pushed until the ground itself pushed back. She fumbled for her phone, probably calling a tow truck, maybe a lawyer, maybe the HOA, cycling through the usual weapons she relied on. None of them were going to lift that SUV out of the wetland it was sitting in. As the minutes dragged on, the embarrassment settled in. Neighbors gathered at a distance, not close enough to interfere, but close enough to witness. Whispers spread, not sharp or mocking, just curious and heavy with understanding. Everyone there had seen her park on my lawn before. Everyone there knew this had been coming, even if they hadn't known how. She tried to climb back into the driver's seat, slipping once as her shoe came free from the mud with a sucking sound that turned a few heads away. When the first tow truck finally arrived, it slowed to a stop, and the driver just stared. He walked around the vehicle, boots sinking slightly with each step, and scratched his head. He asked what happened, and HOA Karen launched into a frantic explanation that made no sense, pointing at the grass like it was a trapdoor I'd sprung without warning. I didn't interrupt. I didn't correct her. I let the story fall apart on its own. The driver tried anyway. Chains clanked, The engine revved, and for a brief moment it looked like the SUV might come free. Instead, the tow truck lurched and sank too, its rear tires biting into the same hidden softness. The sound of collective realization rippled through the small crowd. This wasn't just bad parking anymore. This was something bigger, something structural. HOA Karen's voice went hoarse as she demanded answers, demanded accountability, demanded that someone make this stop. I finally stepped forward then, not to help, but to be seen. I didn't raise my voice or change my posture. I simply existed in the space she had tried to dominate for months. The wetland didn't care about her authority, her tone, or her position. It only cared about weight and pressure, about repetition and abuse, and it had responded accordingly. What made that morning hit as hard as it did wasn't just the sight of her SUV sinking. It was the memory of everything that led there, stacked quietly behind it like a loaded chamber finally firing. When I moved into that house years earlier, I didn't come in looking for fights, power, or dominance. I came in looking for stillness. I wanted a place where days blended into each other without friction, where work ended and silence took over, where my property felt like a boundary the world respected by default. The lawn was the first thing I fixed because it was the first thing anyone saw, including me, and I treated it like a declaration that this space mattered. I earned that lawn inch by inch. I learned the soil, learned where water pooled and where it drained, learned when the sun scorched and when shade lingered too long. I adjusted, reseeded, nurtured it until it stopped being decoration and started feeling like proof that I belonged there, that I maintained what was mine, that I wasn't careless or passive. That kind of care creates authority even before words are spoken. It tells people you're paying attention. HOA. Karen didn't read that message. She read something else entirely. When she moved in, she didn't look at the lawn as something cultivated or protected. She looked at it as empty space, overflow, convenience, something soft enough to take pressure without complaint. The first time she rolled onto it, I told myself it was ignorance. The second time, I told myself it was habit. By the fifth time, it was clear it was choice. I approached her directly, calmly, without accusation. I didn't threaten, didn't posture, didn't escalate. I explained that it was my property and asked her to stop. She smiled the kind of smile people use when they already know the answer they're going to give. She said she'd try. She didn't. The lawn kept taking the hit, the grass flattening, the soil compacting, and every morning her SUV sat there like a stamp of disrespect pressed into the ground. The sign came next. Not aggressive, not sarcastic, just clear. Please don't park on the lawn. She laughed at it like it was a joke meant for someone else. When it fell over the second time, knocked aside by her bumper, she told me I was being dramatic. She told me it was just grass. That phrase mattered. Just grass. That was how she justified everything that came after. I went to the HOA because that's what you're supposed to do. I believed, briefly, in structure. I believed that rules existed to prevent exactly this kind of thing. That illusion died fast. Sitting across from the board, listening to excuses dressed up as neutrality, I learned who HOA Karen really was. She wasn't just a neighbor with bad manners. She was embedded. She sat on the board. She influenced decisions. She filtered complaints. She decided what mattered and what didn't. That realization changed the texture of the conflict. This wasn't about asking someone to be decent anymore. This was about someone using authority as insulation, doing whatever she wanted because she believed nothing could touch her. Every time she parked on my lawn after that, it wasn't just physical damage. It was a reminder that she thought she was untouchable. I documented everything. Dates, times, photos. I kept my tone neutral and my records clean. I didn't rant in group chats or vent to neighbors. I stayed quiet because authority doesn't need noise. It needs preparation. Every denial from the HOA added weight to the decision forming in my head. If the system protected her behavior, then the system would have to validate my response too. The power dynamic shifted long before her SUV ever sank. It shifted the moment I stopped asking and started observing. She thought she was training me to tolerate her. In reality, she was teaching me exactly how she moved, how often she crossed lines, how predictable she was. Authority isn't about shouting louder. It's about understanding patterns well enough to let someone destroy themselves using them. Once I understood how HOA Karen operated inside the structure, everything else fell into place with uncomfortable clarity. She didn't enforce rules. She curated them. She didn't protect standards. She weaponized them. The HOA wasn't a community to her. It was a filter, a way to decide who got friction and who got freedom. Sitting on that board gave her a vantage point that most people never questioned, and she exploited that silence with confidence sharpened by repetition. Every time her SUV rolled onto my lawn after that discovery, it wasn't laziness or convenience anymore. It was a statement. She knew complaints would stall. She knew responses would soften. She knew language like, "We'll look into it," and "let's not escalate," could be used to bury accountability under politeness. I watched it happen in real time. Emails went unanswered for weeks. Meetings ended without conclusions. Issues were reframed until they lost their original shape. The lawn wasn't the problem, I was. The narrative shifted subtly, but deliberately, painting me as sensitive, inflexible, difficult. HOA. Karen never said those words outright. She didn't have to. She let the structure do the talking for her. What made it worse was how public and casual her behavior was. She didn't hide the parking. She didn't sneak it in late at night. She did it in broad daylight, every morning, sometimes even waving as she stepped out of her SUV and onto my grass. That confidence came from knowing the board wouldn't challenge her. It came from knowing the rules bent quietly in her direction. Abuse doesn't always look loud. Sometimes it looks routine. I started paying attention to how she treated other neighbors, too. A trash can left out too long triggered warnings. A fence color sparked debates. People whispered about fines and notices appearing selectively, about conversations that went nowhere unless you knew the right person. HOA. Karen was always present in those stories, hovering in the background, shaping outcomes without ever appearing directly responsible. She had mastered plausible deniability. The lawn became a symbol, not just for me, but for the imbalance itself. Every tire mark was a reminder that authority, when unchecked, rots into entitlement. I stopped seeing her as a single antagonist and started seeing her as a pressure point in a larger system. That shift mattered. It stripped the emotion out of my response and replaced it with precision. You don't fight systems by shouting at them. You outgrow them. I went back through the HOA documents with new eyes, not looking for fairness, but for loopholes, not looking for permission, but for silence. There's power in what rules don't say, and HOA Karen had relied on that ambiguity for years. I realized something important then. The same structure that protected her could protect me, if I learned how to move inside it without announcing myself. Her daily blocking of my lawn continued, predictable as sunrise. She never imagined that each repetition was reinforcing a case against her. Each incident normalized her behavior in a way that would later make it impossible for her to deny. She was training witnesses without realizing it. Neighbors stopped reacting because it had become expected. That expectation would become evidence. The HOA power structure wasn't just enabling her. It was amplifying her confidence. And confidence, when left unchecked, turns sloppy. She started pushing further, parking deeper, lingering longer, daring someone to stop her. She believed the system belonged to her. What she didn't understand was that systems don't care who uses them, only who understands them better. By the time I shifted from frustration to strategy, she had already lost. She just didn't know it yet. The moment I stopped reacting and started researching was the moment the entire balance shifted, even if no one else could see it yet. While HOA Karen kept parking on my lawn with that same careless confidence, I was quietly dismantling the illusion that she was untouchable. I wasn't looking for revenge, and I wasn't looking for clever tricks. I was looking for leverage that couldn't be argued with, something rooted so deeply in process and paperwork that her usual tactics would bounce off without leaving a mark. I started with city codes, not the obvious ones, but the footnotes. The sections most people skim past because they assume they'll never matter. Environmental provisions, drainage guidelines, land use allowances, the kind of rules written to encourage sustainability, but rarely enforced because no one bothers to use them. I read them slowly, line by line, learning the language they used and the conditions they cared about. The more I read, the clearer it became that my lawn wasn't just decorative space. It was potential. That's when I found it, almost buried in a section about runoff mitigation and soil absorption. A provision that allowed homeowners to modify their landscaping to support water conservation, provided it didn't create a safety hazard or permanent structure. No mention of HOA approval beyond notification. No restrictions on depth beyond reasonableness. No requirement that it look a certain way, only that it function as intended. The city didn't just allow it, they encouraged it. The realization didn't hit like excitement. It landed like certainty. This wasn't a loophole that could be closed with a vote or a complaint. This was policy, written years ago, sitting untouched because no one had ever thought to weaponize it against entitlement. I printed it out, highlighted it, cross-referenced it with HOA bylaws that conveniently said nothing about environmentally focused landscaping beyond vague aesthetic language. Silence again. And silence, in rules, is permission. From that point on, everything became methodical. I didn't rush. I didn't improvise. I planned. I sketched out drainage paths, soil layers, and visual camouflage. I learned how bioswales were supposed to function, how water moved through them, how different soil compositions behaved under weight. I wasn't guessing. I was engineering. Each choice was made with two goals in mind: compliance and inevitability. While HOA Karen kept rolling onto the lawn every morning, flattening grass and compacting soil, she was unknowingly helping me. Her tires created ruts that guided water exactly where I wanted it to go. Her weight trained the ground to respond predictably. I documented every pass, every mark, every instance of her blocking my property. Photos, timestamps, angles. What looked like obsession from the outside was actually insulation. I ordered materials that wouldn't raise suspicion. Soil blends designed to stay saturated beneath the surface. Clay layers that resisted drainage just enough to stay unstable. Turf engineered to look healthy even when the ground beneath it was compromised. From above, it would look better than before. From the street, it would look inviting, harmless, ordinary. That contrast mattered. The more normal it appeared, the more confident she would be. I installed everything gradually, never changing the lawn overnight. Small adjustments, subtle shifts, nothing that would trigger curiosity. I added decorative elements that suggested intention rather than defense. Solar lights, native plants. A sign that mentioned water conservation in language pulled straight from the city's own brochures. Each detail served a purpose, not just mechanically, but psychologically. HOA Karen noticed none of it. She never asked why the grass looked thicker or why the soil held moisture longer. She didn't question the sign or the layout. She parked like she always had, trusting routine over awareness. That trust was the final piece of proof I needed. By the time the lawn was fully converted, the evidence was already complete. The paperwork existed. The approvals were documented. The behavior pattern was undeniable. What came next wasn't a surprise waiting to happen. It was a conclusion waiting to be witnessed. The confrontation didn't announce itself with sirens or shouting. It arrived the way consequences always do when they're earned, quietly and without apology. HOA Karen pulled up that morning with the same muscle memory she'd trained into herself, turning the wheel just enough to place her SUV exactly where it had no right to be. She didn't look at the lawn. She didn't look at me. She didn't look at the sign she'd ignored for weeks. She trusted the routine more than reality, and that trust betrayed her instantly. The first sign was the pause, a hesitation so small she almost missed it. The front tires dipped and rebounded like the ground was thinking about whether to hold her up. She pressed the gas, annoyed, and the sound of spinning rubber cut through the quiet street. That was when the lawn gave way for real. The front end dropped, slow and heavy, pulling the rest of the vehicle with it in a way that felt deliberate. She hit the brakes, then the accelerator, then the brakes again, cycling through panic while the SUV continued its descent like it had already decided where it belonged. She opened the door and stepped out, and the mud claimed her shoe with a wet pull that drew attention from down the block. She yanked her foot free, splattering herself, and started shouting, first at the ground, then at the car, then at no one in particular. The volume rose as understanding lagged behind embarrassment. This wasn't something she could posture her way out of. This wasn't a conversation she could dominate. The ground didn't care who she was. By the time the first neighbor stepped outside, her SUV was visibly stuck, tilted at an angle that made denial impossible. Phones came out, not to mock her, but to record something they knew would be discussed later. HOA Karen noticed the attention and tried to switch tactics, calling for help with the same authority she used in meetings, barking orders like someone might still listen. No one moved. They just watched. The tow truck arrived, and the driver took one look at the situation before asking questions she didn't want to answer. He hooked up anyway, because that's what he was paid to do, and the moment he applied tension, his own truck shifted. The rear tires sank just enough to make him stop. He swore under his breath and stepped out, testing the ground with his boot. The realization spread slowly but unmistakably. This wasn't just soft soil. This was engineered. HOA Karen's voice sharpened into accusation then, slicing through the crowd as she pointed at me like she'd finally found the culprit she needed. She shouted about sabotage, about traps, about criminal behavior, words chosen to scare rather than inform. I didn't respond immediately. I let her say it all. I let the accusations pile up until they sounded frantic instead of righteous. When I did speak, it wasn't to defend myself. It was to state facts. I told her the lawn was a city-approved water conservation project. I told her she had parked in it despite posted notices. I told her there was documentation if she needed to see it. The crowd shifted when I said that, not dramatically, but enough. People straightened. They listened. The power dynamic cracked right there, in the space between her shouting and my calm. The second tow truck arrived, bigger and louder, and for a moment she looked relieved, like authority had finally shown up on her side. That relief died when it too struggled, tires sinking into the same deceptive stability. Two immobilized vehicles sitting in my lawn was more than inconvenience. It was spectacle. Neighbors who had never spoken to each other before exchanged looks and quiet commentary. HOA Karen's world, built on control and perception, was collapsing in public. She threatened lawsuits next, her voice trembling as she listed things she clearly didn't understand. I responded by pointing to the sign and offering to email her the approvals. She screamed that she'd take this to the HOA. Someone laughed, not loudly, just enough to be heard. The humiliation landed then, fully and finally. She wasn't commanding the room anymore. She was performing for it. When the HOA emergency meeting was called later that day, the collapse continued without drama. She spoke first, emotional, disorganized, relying on the same authority she always had. I followed with documents, emails, city codes, photos, footage. The room changed with every page. Arguments died before they finished forming. Even the board members who usually shielded her avoided eye contact. By the end of the meeting, there was nothing left for her to stand on. The structure she had leaned on for years finally refused to carry her weight. And for the first time since she'd moved in, HOA Karen had no control over the outcome unfolding in front of everyone. Losing in public didn't end HOA Karen's obsession. It refined it. Once her authority cracked in front of the neighborhood, she stopped relying on volume and started relying on tactics. That shift was almost admirable in its predictability. When people like her can no longer dominate openly, they retreat into technicalities, hoping to suffocate you quietly where no one is watching. She didn't yell anymore. She watched. She documented. She waited for me to slip. The first sign was the inspection notices. Minor complaints framed as concern, lighting too bright, wildlife attracting pests, drainage possibly unsafe. Each one arrived with the same neutral language designed to look reasonable on paper, while being anything but. She wanted the process to exhaust me, to drag me back into endless explanations where she could reclaim ground through attrition. What she didn't understand was that exhaustion only works on people who improvise. I was already months ahead of her. I responded to every notice with precision. Not defensiveness, not sarcasm, just facts. I attached the same documents again and again, never changing the order, never adding commentary. Consistency matters when you're dealing with systems. It builds credibility faster than emotion ever could. Inspectors came and went, some curious, some bored, all professional. Each one left with the same conclusion written in clean handwriting. Compliant, approved, no action needed. That's when she crossed the line from nuisance to liability. One night, after the street had gone quiet, My camera caught movement near the lawn. A shadow, careful and deliberate. HOA. Karen stepped into frame with a bucket and a bag, crouching near the wetland and pouring gravel and cement into the drainage path. It wasn't subtle. It wasn't accidental. It was sabotage, captured from 3 angles with timestamps she couldn't argue. I didn't confront her. I didn't warn her. I filed a report. I submitted the footage to the city and the HOA simultaneously, attaching the same environmental codes she'd tried to weaponize against me. The response was swift in a way she wasn't used to. Fines were issued. Notices were sent. The language was no longer polite. It was corrective. She tried to flip the narrative one last time, staging a confrontation and broadcasting it live, hoping outrage would do what authority no longer could. I didn't raise my voice. I held up the citation number from the police report and let silence do the work. Online, the reaction was immediate and brutal. Sympathy evaporated. Her credibility collapsed in real time, stripped away by her own footage and her own signature. After that, the pressure stopped, not because she learned, but because she ran out of tools. She had exhausted the system she once hid behind. Every complaint she filed now carried her history with it. Every accusation reminded people of the mud, the tow trucks, the fines. She wasn't feared anymore. She was documented, and documentation is a cage you don't escape once it's built around you. The end didn't come with an announcement or a final argument. It arrived the way all real defeats do, quietly and without ceremony. After the fines, after the failed inspections, after the footage circulated, and the whispers settled into consensus, HOA Karen simply stopped appearing. Her SUV vanished from its usual rotation. The windows of her house stayed dark longer each morning. Her name disappeared from the HOA chat, then from the meeting agendas, then from relevance itself. No apology followed, no confrontation, just absence. A few weeks later, a for sale sign went up on her lawn, staked into the same ground she'd once treated like a personal extension of her authority. I watched from my porch as she argued with a realtor, gestures sharp and frustrated, voice raised just enough to remind anyone watching who she used to be. She signed the paperwork with stiff movements, climbed into a different car, and drove away without looking back. There was no crowd this time, no audience. The neighborhood didn't gather. They didn't need to. The story had already ended. My lawn stayed exactly where it was. The wetland settled into itself, grass thick and healthy on the surface, stable now because it was finally being treated the way it was designed to be treated. Water flowed where it should. Birds and insects returned. The space she tried to dominate became something untouchable, protected by the same rules she once bent for her own convenience. No one parked there again, not out of fear, not out of respect for me, but because the boundary was finally understood. The ground didn't need signs anymore. It didn't need explanations. It had already made its position clear. HOA Karen went silent.